refer the case to social workers. You have to, in order to be able to do that with any reasonable possibility of success, you have to have some relationship with the teachers who are teaching your children, and you have to have some relationship with the social workers operating in your area. The chances that follow the success based on this purely, I think, would be viewed with extreme skepticism, and the likelihood is it would ramp up the temperature in the family. You can see that this is a mother who probably wasn't there at the time of whatever has happened, and it will probably be very defensive, and I would have to be very skeptical, not because of the law, but because the courts are just, particularly the senior courts, are real novices when it comes to dealing with these kinds of problems. They just very rarely come before the courts. There are unlike some other jurisdictions, there are no established procedures for dealing with some of these complaints. Certainly the courts are now trying to cobble them together, but there are very few judges in those relevant positions that have the training and expertise to deal with these kind of problems. That's just the reality. If I were talking to a social worker, I'd be giving them their options. Their options would be immediately they could go to the High Court and seek a wardship order. The costs of taking that action, very high. Not the legal costs, but the practical resource implications. Preparing for such a case, seeking lawyers to bring the case. If you're seeking legal aid, the cost, expense, and difficulty. And the practicality is most social workers, they just don't have legal resources available to them to discuss how to do any of those things, even if they know the thresholds are being met. The other thing you could suggest is, well, you can either refer the case to the social welfare department or to the nearest responsible police officer for the case to be referred for a care protection order. The reality is, unless you had a good relationship with either police or social welfare, you would be facing an uphill climb. Both of those entities have have low resources, and few of their resources are particularly on the police side, trained to deal with this kind of situation. And most of the time their attitude is towards blame. Can we prove that someone has abused this child? I mean, you use the expression, is the case established? Which isn't really the legal test. It is not the legal test. The legal test is this child in need of care or protection? That does not require a perpetrator. That does not require fault. And for me, the key problem with using the care protection order process, even when you have police or social welfare department willing to play ball, you are facing judicial officers who are actually criminal judicial officers. I have attended care protection order proceedings where they refer to the child as the defendant in child protection. It is very alarming, and it displays the mentality. And I don't really blame them, because you are asking for junior judicial officers, magistrates, who day in, day out deal with criminal cases. And even in that court, the juvenile court, are used to dealing with criminal defendant children. And even in that circumstance, they shouldn't be referring to them as defendants, but that is the mentality, and that is problematic. Now, the other option would be to, and I think most social workers and teachers would know this, is to refer the matter for a MDCC. And already I heard some of the previous panel, they talked about the difficulties involved with MDCC. I would like to point out one of them that would immediately show up in this scenario. One of the big problems with, well, several big problems. Who initiates the MDCC? The procedural guide is very opaque on this, and generally speaking, if you want people to actually attend the MDCC, the initiator has to be from the social welfare department. The membership of the MDCC, leave aside the attendance, which may be difficult. If you will want a police officer to attend in this case, the relevant police officer should attend. Very often they do not attend. But the membership is different from the attendance. So you can see already there would be several teachers who might attend, potentially social workers, potentially a pediatrician, although from the looks of it, the child wouldn't have seen a pediatrician. And then there will be several members of the social welfare department. Now, if there is a school social worker, the school social worker might not even be treated as a member of the MDCC. They will just be present. They may be asked for their views, but they will have no role in the decision making. And in fact, at least 2 of the decision makers in the MDCC will never have met the child, because they will be senior members of the social welfare department. Now, I don't criticize their membership, but I say that there's a problem with excluding relevant professionals who have direct experience or or relevant professional expertise from the decision making. The other problem is the MDCC itself, under the current guideline, would be delayed if the mother in this case refused to participate. And in this kind of fact pattern, extremely likely that the mother would say, well, she would probably be busy, but then she might also, given the context of the family, she might be, and depending on who referred it, she might be very hesitant to participate. And if that were the case, the MDCC would be deferred and deferred and deferred. Yeah, okay, I'm now monopolizing the panel. I'm sorry.
Very thorough comment. Thank you. Thank you so much. I noticed, could I ask, could I invite the audience to share on this particular part? Because in my past experience, a case like this, as Assam mentioned, would apply for a care order. And I envision one may run into certain difficulties. So how do we overcome those? I don't know about the current scene in the community. I think those who work actively with suspected abuse families and circumstances, attending or chairing case conferences, would have a lot to share. And in those days that I've been chairing and working, I think we work very hard for necessary parties to come forward. And I have an experience of having pathologists to come forward who have been very, very hesitant, but we spent considerable hours discussing, and eventually he came. And it needs a lot of efforts of, say, members to be able to involve significant parties in the conferences, and they have not been kept away as just merely observers. So I don't know about the current situation. Maybe the scene has changed, and I hope advocates will be there to hope to change it back so that it's not driving backward rather than going forward. And I know the Against Child Abuse is represented. I don't know if the Against Child Abuse, either chair or members would like to comment, or colleagues would like to share experience and the current scene, current practice.
Hi, I'm Dr. Patrick Cheung. I'm a pediatrician by trade, and I also volunteer my time as chairperson of the Against Child Abuse, an NGO of 40 years in Hong Kong. We see dark side of children, but we see also bright side of children. And in the hospital, we manage a large number of children, 1,000 cases in all of HA, Hospital Authority. And as there is so much reflection, when I listen to the different panelists, I was talking to Grenfell Cross about the child neglect cases that was reported in the newspaper yesterday, when there was a marked increase in child neglect. When you further look into the cases for age under 2 for child neglect only, but not including the physical abuse, sexual abuse, or psychological abuse. And when you analyze it from 2004 up to 2015, you see about 15-20 cases every year. But from 2015, 16, 2017, you see the number from 20 jumped to 50, and then jumped to 100. And then the last year, 2017, 167 cases of child neglect in children aged less than 2. now. When we ask the government what are those cases, when you look into the statistical report, they say the inadequacy of the child carers. But when you talk with the frontline workers, we are seeing a lot of child drug abuse cases. So we think, we are quite confident that this sharp increase in the number are due to drug abuse cases, the hidden harm. And what causes this type of increase is, I would say partly or mostly is from the child fatality review. We analyzed the Yang Jiwai's case, okay? And then we make a recommendation for urine drug testing, okay? And then it was adopted by the professionals, social workers, the doctors, etc., the teachers, okay? It's a legitimate test for medical assessment. That's why the number of cases shoot up so much. But having said that, I must say the different committee set up by the government, they have no teeth, they have no power, okay? They have no power. I'm quite disappointed the government officials are not here, because we are in the community, we are, there are so many stakeholders working towards about, you know, child right. And then to the main mover for child right needs to come from the top, okay? They have to empower us, okay? For the Children's Commission, they need to be statutory, but disappointingly, it is not. So I was thinking when I, you know, sit around listening, it's only us talking. How should the Children's Commission start to work? I'm glad to say, like for example, the setting up of a data bank, research, etc., etc. So I would say the Children's Commission must set their priority right, okay? Priority right to deal with the urgent issues like mandatory training for the social worker who attend to kindergarten teachers. If they are so green, first 1 year or 2 years after graduation, you put them into this highly professional social work area, it is not doing justice to children, okay? And when they do it, do the job for 2 or 3 years, they get moved on, they get promoted. So there's so much to share about. So data bank, a mandatory training in pediatrics. We are pediatricians, so we have a mandatory training for young pediatricians. All pediatric trainees should undergo mandatory training in child protection and child right before they become a specialist. So this is something that on the medical side, we since 2009, we starting having that type of system. So right to the MDCC and the COP order, there are a lot of subtleties, okay? So you need this social worker with statutory power who can apply to the court for COP order. And if the case is being, you know, being handled by a NGO or an NGO, they do not have any statutory power to apply for COP order. And whose best interests are we talking about? You know, when we discuss about COP order in the MDCC, it's often turned down, not for the child's best interest, I'm sorry to say. Okay, so a lot of frustration. I hope I be able to convince the audience to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cheung. I think that from all the conversations we've had so far, including with the earlier panel, it's very clear that although you know, there are limitations, there are clearly many limitations in terms of the law and also resources. I mean, they keep coming up constantly. But I think we also have to ask ourselves, while we wait for law to come into effect, And as we heard, Fernando and Azan and others are driving for this, and Dennis as well. But we can't just sit, because daily there are so many incidents that are cropping up. And what we're hearing, I think, from the panel and also from Priscilla's experience is that, sometimes we have to push really hard when we are at the front line and, confronting these situations. But the children's rights cannot depend on the stroke of luck of what kind of case officer you have, or a policeman who's willing to show up at the MDCC, or the right person who is able to initiate the MDCC. So I think on our part, what we can do is at least to start developing these communities of practice where we have these regular conversations about what are the links between, for example, parental drug abuse and the risk factor to young children. Or earlier, as we mentioned, in terms of family violence and other risk factors to witnesses of that family violence. And then particularly, what are the strategies that we can share with others that we have successfully used? So for example, Priscilla, you said you sat down and really convinced and persuaded this person to come. It took a lot of work, but eventually they came. But also, as Azan mentioned, connections with social welfare department personnel and the district personnel in our sort of immediate vicinity is very, very important too. So what are the strategies, and how can we build these resources and share our best practices widely? That's really the key. So I hope we can reflect on this a little bit more, but we have to keep doing, I think each of us have to push from all angles to really mount the pressure to improve the situation concerning children, because we can't leave justice for them to chance. I just want to take the opportunity in the last sort of few minutes that we have for the panel to come back to the child rights assessment framework, if you don't mind. I was thinking about your reflections and sharing, and wondering if, when you thought about this case, when you developed sort of your considerations of what are the things you would do or what do you think would happen, did the framework help in any way to ensure that different considerations that are relevant were actually considered? I mean, from what I heard, I felt that Azan, your sort of systematic sort of approach to looking at which other children are at risk, what's the family context, and what's the immediate need and what's the long-term need, I felt that there were some parallels there. But I'm keen to know, is this something that can help to ensure a comprehensive assessment is undertaken? So maybe I'll start with you, Azan.
I wrote my notes with that in mind.
I see. Great.
I really appreciated that you had included the issue of delay, which, if you ask me, is the biggest problem with the current legal guidelines and the current approaches. There's so much delay. And then the second biggest problem, and which I appreciate also included in here, is the consideration of the whole family context, especially other children. And I really appreciate you put that here. The thing that I think is missing from this is that I think this is maybe a slightly reactive framework. And I would have added those two things, which is sort of what happens before you get a case, developing those professional networks, professional cooperation, developing resources, and then the restorative aspect, which is what happens after you've dealt with the immediate protection aspect. Because a child that's experienced violence, experienced abuse, experienced neglect, after you have remedied the immediate threat, that child is in the red, so to speak. The child needs more resources, and that's reflected in the CRC, the convention. The other thing, which I thought was really great, is that you included references to the convention articles, which I think is helpful in helping people to understand the role, what these articles really mean, and developing a language that I think will be more useful when talking with other agencies, particularly government agencies. The only thing I would add to that is I think people also need to be aware that there are Hong Kong constitutional protections for children that, to my mind, never get referenced. There, in particular, Article 20 of the Bill of Rights, which specifically creates a duty on the state to protect children. And I think, well, I would just try to incorporate that somehow, and I think people ought to be using that in their normal language.
Thanks. Well, you've spoken like me. A lot of people complain there's too much law in this document. I don't know what to do with it. So,
but I'm a lawyer, right?
Exactly. So it speaks to you.
The other problem I was mentioning is there aren't enough lawyers. So,
Any other reflections from panelists? I'd be very grateful. Yes.
I just want to chip in that the framework is okay. It's quite relevant to our normal investigation before an MDCC. Yeah, but I want to echo one thing for the last panel, for the resources. Yeah, because what we need is to operate such a system. We need to have some resources. First, for the training and enabling to secure good manpower in this circle. The second is the downstream service. Yeah, because the asylum is a problem. Yeah, because you need to put some space to remove the children in urgent case. Yeah, nowadays we use the pediatric wards for the first line asylum, and for the small group home and the respite service downstream is almost full, and it's not providing sufficient service. So it blocking the way out for the MDCC. We are not giving free choice to do that. Yeah, so it's the second problem. The third is about the high risk family. Yeah, for the the parents with mental health problem, and also have violence and also drug abuse, taking more risk on the children. Perhaps we need to think about, without discrimination, we need to think about how to support that kind of family and protect the children.
Thank you. Yes, Cindy?
I think I think the assessment itself is very comprehensive. I think it's good for the school administrators, teachers to have open up them to this kind of assessment, to have so that they can have a full range or all-rounded considerations for what is good or what is good for the children and their families. I echo with Charles that resources is very, very important, because now we are really the case is so sad to have happened like that. It's come to a case of child negligence and abuse, because with such families of a complicated family situation, if we can have more resources so that we can have early intervention with the parents for employment, for unemployment, for relationship with husbands, couples relationships, if we can have early intervention, early resources with early input, so the case will not come to this end of abuse or in such conclusions. That's why I think besides child protection, we need to have more resources put on for the prevention of child abuse. Prevention of child abuse, I think more resources can, I think school is a very good platform, because most of our schools get to connect with hundreds families or more than hundreds families. That's why we can have a lot of resources. We can have more support to the parents, to the family, when they are facing stress, facing pressures, or they or enhance their capacity of child rearing or skills of parenting. I think it will do more good to the prevention of child abuse.
Thank you so much. Those are some really, really helpful suggestions. Yeah.
I agree that the framework is very comprehensive. This is not only at the initial assessment phase. I think the child protection or the child abuse cases not stop at the MDCC conference and the patient either go home or to the placement. The patients, the child has to be have the continual follow-up by the workers, and then I think this framework is also another is a tool that's for the continual assessment of the any recurrence, any of the abuse problems, because we do see some cases during the home leave from the foster parents or the placement. They do have some of them will have come to our hospital with some bruises, or they have the problems coming up that the foster parents will tell us there is the unusual behavior of the patients. I think this framework can help to monitoring the patients and a subsequent follow-up.
Thank you so much. Right, so we've heard, I think, extensively, and in a way it dovetails very nicely from the earlier panel, that there are lots of things that need to be moving forward simultaneously, but we've also heard about the tremendous challenges given the resources gap. So that's where I think we should appeal to members of the Commission on Children who are here, who are obviously listening, and so that they can make sure that these items are firmly on the agenda, and so that we can at least have a timetable to consider when some or all of these aspects will be addressed. And later on this afternoon, we'll have the Chief Secretary, who's the chairperson of the Commission on Children, here. So I'm not sure how much opportunity we'll have to engage him on these questions, but certainly the resources, training, research aspects, and the data monitoring are some of the key considerations, and then, of course, the legal reform. So I hope we'll have the opportunity to emphasize those aspects while he's with us. Remains for me to thank the panel. Please join me in thanking everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, panelists and moderators. So before we wrap up the morning sessions, as Professor Kapai has mentioned, we do have members of Children's Commission here today as our audience. So can I invite them on stage for 2 photos? So can I invite the members of Children's Commission together with our guests of honors, Ms. Otani, Ms. Block, and Mr. Sukharovic, to join in together with Mr. Fernando Jung and our organizers for a group photo? Sure, can I invite again the members of Children's Commission and other speakers as well? Mr. Fernando Jung. Dr. Chow. Dr. Chow. Technician 想麻煩可唔可以熄一熄呢度嗰個燈啊？投射嗰個燈唔該。Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the wonderful morning. And I can announce that it's time for lunch. Okay, so for panelists and speakers, please enjoy the lunch at 9th floor. And for our audience, you may find the lunch reception at the 1st floor.
For those speakers and panelists, please follow me to go to the 9th floor for the lunch. Okay?
收起佢啦。下晝其實得 Rasa 都高嘅，其實都唔使要你個台。